The vote was already happening when the giant chamber doors sealed behind Nora Bennett, and she knew before reaching her seat that humanity had already lost. Above the circular council floor, glowing numbers climbed one after another as representatives from 43 civilizations cast their decisions. The motion seemed simple on the surface, but everyone inside understood its consequences. The resolution would transfer control of humanity's frontier colonies to direct Galactic Council administration. Those distant worlds had been explored, settled, and defended by human pioneers, when every other species dismissed them as frozen wastelands. Now those same worlds had suddenly become valuable enough for everyone else to claim. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien delegates watched in silence, believing they were witnessing another routine political victory. None of them realized they were watching the moment an entire civilization chose to walk away forever. Nora remained perfectly still while Counselor Threx delivered another polished speech through the council translator. His calm voice described humanity as unpredictable, too independent, and dangerously aggressive beyond the frontier. He insisted the council wished only to protect peace throughout the galaxy. Nora had heard that same excuse for 6 exhausting years. Protection had justified restricting human trade routes. Protection had delayed military cooperation. Protection had denied equal voting rights despite humanity fulfilling every obligation asked of them. Every compromise humans accepted only encouraged another demand. Every sacrifice earned another polite rejection. Looking across the massive chamber, Nora understood something painful. Patience had never been rewarded because respect had never truly existed. Humanity had always been tolerated only while useful. The final count appeared above the chamber. 41 votes supported the seizure. Only 2 delegates opposed it. Soft applause echoed through the room while several representatives exchanged satisfied glances. Counselor Threx turned toward Nora with practiced sympathy and invited her to give humanity's final response before implementation. She slowly stood, holding the carefully prepared speech she had written 3 sleepless nights earlier. It spoke about unity, cooperation, shared sacrifice, and peaceful coexistence. Every sentence had been chosen with diplomatic precision, yet as she looked around the chamber, those words suddenly felt empty. One by one, she folded the pages together, placed them quietly on her desk, and decided that humanity deserved honesty instead of another desperate request for acceptance. Her voice carried across the enormous hall without hesitation. She reminded the council that 6 years earlier, she had arrived believing mutual respect could eventually overcome fear and prejudice. She admitted that she had been wrong. Humanity had defended neglected frontiers, rescued endangered colonies, and strengthened trade routes benefiting every member civilization, yet equality had always remained just beyond reach. Today's vote proved the truth more clearly than every insult before it. The council had mistaken human patience for weakness and human goodwill for dependence. Nora explained that she would not argue against the decision because some judgments revealed far more about those casting them than those receiving them. Calmly reaching inside her jacket, she removed a single authorization tablet and activated its holographic display. The glowing document suspended itself above the chamber where every delegate could read the words, "Formal notice of withdrawal. Human delegation to the Galactic Council." For several seconds, absolute silence filled the room before hundreds of translators attempted to process hundreds of shocked voices simultaneously. Chaos erupted. Delegates stood from their seats demanding explanations while security officers exchanged uncertain glances. Counselor Threx immediately called for order and urged Nora to reconsider what he described as an emotional overreaction. Another senior delegate questioned whether humanity would truly abandon decades of cooperation over one disagreement. Nora looked directly at them and answered with complete certainty. Humanity was not leaving because of one resolution. Humanity was leaving because every previous compromise had quietly led to this final insult. Without raising her voice, Nora declared that every treaty, advisory committee, and cooperative agreement between humanity and the Galactic Council was now terminated. Human territory would remain under human authority. Human borders would be defended by human fleets alone. The future of 11 billion people would never again depend upon votes cast by strangers who neither understood nor respected them. She thanked the two delegations who had opposed the resolution because they had at least attempted fairness, then wished everyone else success with the future they had chosen. Finally, she turned away from the council floor. Every footstep echoed through the chamber as hundreds of stunned representatives watched the lone human ambassador calmly leave without looking back once. Outside the council hall, Nora walked through endless silver corridors until she reached the docking bay, where her courier vessel, the Meridian, waited silently. Once inside the cockpit, she finally allowed herself one long breath before activating the engines. An encrypted transmission arrived almost immediately from Daniel Ford, her trusted aide at the human embassy. His first question carried disbelief rather than anger. He asked whether the withdrawal announcement had been some kind of negotiation tactic. Nora quietly answered that it was permanent. Daniel reminded her how many trade agreements, defense partnerships, and diplomatic relationships would disappear overnight. She acknowledged every consequence but explained that remaining inside a system built upon unequal treatment would eventually cost humanity far more than independence ever could. As the Meridian departed the station, Nora watched the enormous council complex shrink against the stars until it became only another distant point of light. She imagined frantic debates already beginning inside the chamber she had left behind. Many delegates would probably believe humanity would return after a few difficult months once isolation became uncomfortable. They did not understand the people they had underestimated. Humanity had crossed oceans, survived wars, settled impossible planets, and rebuilt civilization countless times throughout history. Starting again was practically woven into their identity. Nora contacted Earth and informed the government that the withdrawal had been completed. From that moment forward, every colony, shipyard, research station, and frontier settlement would stand together without waiting for permission from anyone beyond human space. 3 years passed faster than anyone expected. Human diplomats returned home. Massive shipyards expanded across independent colonies. New communication relays replaced council infrastructure. Frontier defenses doubled, while commerce shifted toward neutral civilizations willing to trade without political conditions. Nora herself retired from public office and accepted her cousin Grace's invitation to spend time on the peaceful farming world of Astor Hollow. For the first time in years, she repaired machinery instead of political relationships and slept through entire nights without rehearsing speeches inside her mind. Yet beyond humanity's borders, strange stories slowly began spreading among independent traders. Entire convoys disappeared. Old patrol routes became increasingly dangerous. Then came the most disturbing rumor of all. Several distant council systems had stopped answering every transmission. No battle reports, no distress calls. 3 years after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, Nora Bennett stood ankle-deep in wet soil beside a broken harvesting drone on Astor Hollow, surprised that she had not thought about the council in weeks. The quiet farming colony had slowly healed wounds. Diplomacy never could. Every sunrise brought honest work instead of political arguments, and every evening ended beneath peaceful stars rather than artificial station lights. Humanity had transformed during those years as well. Independent shipyards expanded faster than anyone predicted. Frontier defenses became stronger than ever, and new trade partnerships flourished beyond council influence. Instead of collapsing without galactic approval, human civilization discovered a confidence it had never truly possessed before. Yet while humanity quietly prospered, distant rumors continued drifting across the frontier like dark clouds gathering beyond the horizon. Traveling merchants often stopped at Grace's farm to exchange supplies and news from neighboring systems. Most stories concerned rising prices or damaged cargo routes. But one experienced trader named Owen Bryce always carried stranger reports. During one evening meal, he mentioned pirate attacks increasing throughout former council territory. Convoys that once crossed safely now vanished without warning. Entire shipping lanes had become ghost routes avoided by everyone willing to listen. Grace blamed ordinary criminals taking advantage of reduced patrols, yet Owen quietly disagreed. He had spent decades navigating frontier space and insisted something felt fundamentally different. Pirates usually demanded cargo or ransom, These attacks left almost nothing behind except drifting wreckage and unanswered transmissions. Nora listened carefully, without saying much, though an uneasy feeling settled deeper inside her with every word Owen spoke. Weeks became months, and the disturbing stories only multiplied. Small mining colonies stopped responding to routine communications before suddenly reappearing with frightened survivors unwilling to explain what had happened. Independent freighters reported abandoned stations still powered yet completely empty. Long-range beacons continued broadcasting navigation signals, even though nobody answered docking requests anymore. Humanity officially considered these isolated incidents occurring beyond its borders, but Nora found herself remembering the old council chamber whenever another rumor arrived. She recognized the familiar pattern of governments minimizing uncomfortable truths until problems became impossible to ignore. Every explanation sounded strangely similar to the careful diplomatic language once used whenever the council wished unpleasant realities would quietly disappear. The silence spreading across neighboring systems no longer felt accidental. It felt organized, patient, and frighteningly deliberate. One cold autumn evening, Owen landed unexpectedly with fresh damage covering one side of his cargo ship. His usually relaxed expression had completely vanished. While Grace hurried to inspect the scorched hull, Owen gathered everyone inside the farmhouse and described what he had witnessed only 2 days earlier. A convoy carrying civilian supplies had entered a routine trade corridor before every ship suddenly disappeared from long-range scanners. There were no distress calls, no emergency beacons, and no detectable weapons fire. Rescue vessels eventually located twisted wreckage scattered across empty space, but every escape pod remained sealed from the inside without a single survivor. Owen admitted that hardened traders had already begun abandoning entire sectors because nobody could explain what waited there. Even experienced captains now whispered about something they simply called the silence. That night, Nora barely slept. Every strange report replayed inside her thoughts until sunrise painted pale light across the distant grain fields. She repeatedly reminded herself that humanity had chosen independence precisely to avoid being drawn into endless council failures. Those vanished colonies belonged to governments that had repeatedly dismissed human warnings and sacrificed cooperation for political pride. Yet another part of her refused to ignore the growing pattern. Entire civilizations did not simply disappear without leaving evidence. Something intelligent was moving through former council territory, one system at a time. Whatever it was, it respected no borders and answered no questions. Nora could not shake the feeling that the peaceful years humanity had enjoyed might soon become only the calm before something unimaginably larger finally revealed itself. Only 3 days later, an encrypted priority transmission interrupted breakfast. Daniel Ford appeared on the farmhouse display looking older and far more exhausted than Nora remembered. Without wasting time, he explained that human listening stations along the frontier had intercepted multiple distress calls from neighboring council systems. Every recording ended exactly the same way. A frightened voice would begin requesting immediate assistance before the transmission suddenly stopped in the middle of a sentence. Equipment diagnostics confirmed the communication arrays themselves remained functional after each interruption. It was as though the people speaking had simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Daniel admitted the pattern had repeated 9 separate times within 6 months. Humanity no longer believed coincidence could explain what was happening beyond its borders. Nora traveled with Daniel to Corwin Reach, a heavily fortified listening station overlooking the old frontier patrol routes humanity had once protected for decades. Inside the operations center, dozens of analysts monitored hundreds of silent frequencies, hoping someone somewhere might still answer. Lucy Hart, the station's youngest communications specialist, displayed a growing map covered with dark markers representing vanished systems. The pattern immediately caught Nora's attention. The disappearances were not random. They followed former patrol corridors abandoned after humanity withdrew from the council. Every new silent world appeared just beyond the last one, like carefully placed footsteps moving steadily toward occupied space. Daniel confessed that nobody understood the enemy responsible because nobody had ever survived long enough to describe it. Humanity possessed only scattered recordings, sensor fragments, and an expanding trail of terrifying silence. For hours, Nora listened to every recovered distress transmission. Different languages, different species, different star systems, yet one chilling detail repeated almost perfectly within every desperate message. Survivors always mentioned seeing figures they translated only as the quiet ones or those who do not speak. None reported negotiations, warnings, or demands. There were no declarations of war and no requests for surrender. Something simply arrived, advanced without hesitation, and left entire civilizations unable to answer another communication ever again. Lucy enlarged the latest projection showing 19 confirmed dark systems slowly expanding toward human territory. Daniel quietly admitted current calculations suggested the mysterious force could reach humanity's frontier within 2 years if nothing changed. The room fell completely silent because everyone understood the terrifying truth hidden inside those numbers. Daniel finally turned toward Nora with the question nobody else wanted to ask aloud. Humanity needed someone capable of entering former council territory without immediately creating political panic, someone who understood alien cultures, diplomacy, and the hidden meanings behind official reports. Despite retiring years earlier, Nora remained uniquely qualified for such a mission. She stared through the observation window toward countless distant stars, remembering the promise she had made never to return after leaving the council chamber forever. Yet 19 silent worlds were impossible to ignore, and every passing month shortened the distance separating that unknown darkness from human colonies built through sacrifice and determination. After a long breath, she quietly accepted the assignment. At first light, the Meridian would leave once again, carrying Nora back toward the galaxy. 4 days after leaving Corwin Reach, the Meridian drifted through abandoned council space where even automated navigation beacons transmitted with unusual gaps between their signals. Nora Bennett followed the old patrol routes that humanity had once protected for decades, but the familiar corridors now felt strangely lifeless. No merchant traffic crossed the lanes. No patrol ships requested identification. Entire sectors that had once bustled with constant movement now seemed frozen beneath endless stars. Suddenly, the proximity alarm screamed through the cockpit. Nora reacted instantly, pulling the Meridian into a violent turn as a massive section of twisted metal spun across her bow. The ship narrowly escaped collision, and the forward scanners revealed something far worse than ordinary wreckage. An entire battlefield floated silently ahead, stretching farther than her sensors could immediately measure. Carefully guiding the Meridian between shattered hulls, Nora recognized dozens of destroyed council warships drifting without formation. Some still glowed faintly from recent weapons impacts, while others had already begun freezing beneath the darkness of space. Escape pods floated unopened beside fractured cruisers, and damaged defense platforms slowly rotated without power. There were almost no energy signatures anywhere inside the debris field. Whatever battle had happened here ended quickly and completely. Nora activated every scanner available, searching desperately for survivors before deciding whether to retreat. For several tense minutes, nothing appeared except broken ships and silent stars. Then a weak emergency beacon flickered at the very edge of sensor range. The signal barely remained active, but someone inside the drifting pod was still alive. Against every instinct warning her to leave immediately, Nora maneuvered the Meridian toward the damaged escape capsule. Every minute spent stationary increased the possibility that whatever destroyed the fleet might still be nearby. Still, memories of countless unanswered distress calls prevented her from abandoning another survivor. After carefully bringing the pod aboard, she forced open its damaged hatch and found a single exhausted passenger wrapped inside an emergency thermal blanket. Her breathing remained shallow, yet her eyes slowly opened as the cabin lights brightened. Nora immediately recognized the elderly alien despite months of hardship changing her appearance. Counselor Sarah, one of only 2 delegates who had voted against humanity's removal from the Galactic Council, stared back with exhausted disbelief before quietly whispering that she never expected the next face she saw to belong to a human. Nora helped Sarah into the small medical compartment, while onboard scanners treated dehydration, exhaustion, and several minor injuries. Once stabilized, Sarah insisted there was no time to waste because every passing hour allowed the mysterious enemy to advance farther. 6 days earlier, she had attended an emergency regional summit on Corin's Gate, when the attack began without warning. There had been no negotiations, demands, or declarations of war. Strange dark vessels simply appeared throughout the system and advanced with terrifying precision. Every attempt at organized resistance collapsed within hours. Military stations disappeared first, followed by communications centers, orbital shipyards, and eventually entire cities. Those who escaped witnessed worlds being stripped of infrastructure before absolute silence settled across everything left behind. Sarah admitted she had been fleeing ever since, watching more systems vanish behind her after every jump. Nora questioned her carefully, hoping to identify the attackers responsible for 19 silent worlds. Sarah's answer only deepened the mystery. The invaders did not identify themselves because they never communicated at all. Council scientists nicknamed them the Quiet Ones, simply because nobody had ever heard them broadcast a single message. They behaved less like conquerors, and more like an unstoppable process moving methodically from system to system. Resources disappeared, populations vanished, communication ceased completely. Worlds remained physically intact, yet every organized sign of civilization simply ended. Sarah explained that Council fleets repeatedly attempted traditional military strategies, but each battle ended with the same devastating result. The enemy adapted rapidly while showing no concern for casualties, territory, or political objectives. They advanced only forward, leaving perfect silence wherever they passed. The conversation became even more unsettling when Sarah revealed classified information hidden from every ordinary Council citizen. Official investigations confirmed the first encounters had begun nearly 2 years earlier, but were dismissed as isolated pirate attacks because no survivors could explain what truly happened. By the time senior leadership recognized the scale of the threat, entire frontier sectors had already been lost. Worse still, Council strategists eventually discovered that almost every early attack occurred along the exact patrol routes humanity had abandoned after withdrawing from the Galactic Council. For 30 years, human fleets had quietly protected regions far beyond their formal responsibilities, discouraging pirates, resolving local conflicts, and responding faster than anyone realized. Once humanity departed, invisible cracks slowly spread throughout frontier security until something unknown finally stepped through the opening nobody believed existed. Sarah lowered her eyes before admitting another painful truth. Many Council leaders had secretly understood how valuable human patrols truly were, yet political pride prevented them from defending humanity during the final vote. Jealousy over human efficiency, rapid expansion, and growing influence outweighed practical wisdom. Even delegates who respected humanity failed to organize meaningful opposition before it was too late. Sarah confessed that casting one symbolic vote against the resolution now felt painfully insignificant compared to the consequences that followed. She apologized without expecting forgiveness, because apologies could never restore the worlds already consumed by silence. Nora listened quietly, remembering 6 exhausting years spent requesting equality from governments that never intended to grant it. Anger still existed inside her, yet witnessing Sarah's genuine regret made that anger far more complicated than simple resentment. Before exhaustion finally overcame her, Sarah removed a heavily encrypted data drive hidden beneath her emergency blanket and placed it into Nora's hands. The storage device contained everything remaining from the Council's failed investigations, including battle recordings, tactical analyses, sensor logs, fleet movements, and every scientific observation gathered before communication collapsed. She explained that if the Meridian reached human space safely, humanity would possess more information about the Quiet Ones than any surviving civilization. Nora secured the drive carefully. Understanding its importance could determine whether humanity eventually survived the approaching threat. Outside the viewport, shattered warships continued drifting through endless darkness like forgotten monuments marking the place where an entire defense fleet had failed. Every broken vessel silently testified that pride and delayed action had cost the galaxy far more than anyone imagined. After setting a course toward human territory, Nora remained alone on the bridge while stars stretched endlessly ahead of the Meridian. She thought about the day she walked away from the Council chamber believing humanity had finally escaped endless political humiliation. That decision had allowed humanity to become stronger, more independent, and more united than ever before. Yet it had also unintentionally exposed weaknesses the Council never recognized until disaster arrived. The Quiet Ones were still advancing, and Sarah's data suggested they would eventually reach human borders unless someone stopped them first. Nora understood that delivering this information home would begin another difficult debate, one forcing humanity to decide whether to ignore the suffering beyond its borders or confront an enemy threatening every civilization alike. Far behind the meridian, another distant system disappeared from communications, and the growing silence quietly. The war room inside humanity's Joint Defense Command remained completely silent as Nora Bennett placed Counselor Sarah's recovered data drive onto the center table. Around her sat military commanders, colonial governors, engineers, and intelligence officers who had spent the last 3 years building an independent civilization, free from Galactic Council control. Massive holographic displays surrounded the room, showing star maps filled with expanding dark sectors where communication had completely disappeared. Lucy Hart finished processing the recovered battle recordings and projected the latest calculations above the conference table. According to every available projection, the mysterious force known only as the Quiet Ones would reach humanity's outer frontier in less than 2 years. If their rate of advance continued increasing, that timeline could become much shorter. Nobody spoke because everyone understood the responsibility now resting on humanity alone. Daniel Ford carefully summarized everything Nora had witnessed beyond the frontier: the destroyed fleet at Corin's Gate, Counselor Sarah's escape, the Council's hidden failures. Most importantly, the revelation that humanity's old patrol routes had unknowingly protected the entire region for decades. When Daniel finished, Admiral Edward Lane immediately stood and rejected any proposal involving intervention beyond human territory. He reminded everyone how the Galactic Council had treated humanity as second-class members despite decades of loyal service. The same governments now facing destruction had voted to seize human colonies only 3 years earlier. Lane argued that humanity finally possessed secure borders, strong defenses, and growing prosperity because it had stopped sacrificing its future for civilizations that never appreciated those sacrifices. Several commanders quietly nodded in agreement. Others around the table saw the situation differently. Colonial Administrator Alice Turner reminded the Council that every vanished system allowed the Quiet Ones to gather more resources before eventually reaching human space. Waiting behind stronger walls did not eliminate the danger. It merely postponed the inevitable confrontation. Lucy displayed additional sensor projections showing the expanding pattern of silent systems slowly approaching independent trade routes used by humanity every week. Economic advisors warned that neighboring neutral civilizations would soon become trapped between the advancing darkness and human borders. Refugees would inevitably arrive seeking safety. Independent commerce would collapse across entire sectors. Even without direct invasion, humanity's hard-earned prosperity would slowly unravel while surrounding civilizations disappeared one after another. The debate quickly transformed from politics into a difficult question about survival itself. For nearly an hour, Nora remained silent, while both sides presented increasingly passionate arguments. She understood Admiral Lane's anger because she had personally endured 6 years inside the council chamber, watching humanity repeatedly dismissed, despite every sacrifice offered in good faith. She also understood Alice Turner's warning because Sarah's battle recordings showed the Quiet Ones adapting faster with every conquered world. Finally, Nora stood and walked toward the enormous star map covering the front wall. She pointed first toward humanity's independent colonies, then toward the expanding darkness spreading across neighboring systems. Calmly, she explained that the question before them was not whether the Galactic Council deserved rescue. The true question was what kind of civilization humanity had become during the years spent building its independence. Nora reminded everyone why humanity withdrew from the Council in the first place. They had not left because they hated other civilizations. They had left because self-respect demanded equality rather than endless compromise. Independence had never been about isolation. It had been about choosing their own future instead of allowing others to define it. If humanity now refused to help innocent worlds solely because of old political resentment, Then every lesson learned since leaving the council would become meaningless. She admitted she still remembered every insult delivered inside that great chamber, every broken promise, and every vote denying equal treatment. Yet she refused to believe humanity had fought so hard for dignity, only to become another civilization, measuring compassion according to political convenience. The room grew quieter with every sentence she spoke. Daniel then introduced a detailed operational proposal prepared during Nora's return journey. Humanity would not rejoin the Galactic Council or submit itself to foreign command. Instead, it would launch an independent expedition under complete human authority. The mission would intercept the Quiet Ones before they reached additional populated systems, while gathering intelligence unavailable through existing Council records. Every participating vessel would remain under human command, using tactics developed during 3 years of independent military reform rather than outdated Council formations. Engineers explained how newly designed warships emphasized adaptability, decentralized leadership, and rapid battlefield decision-making. Unlike Council fleets restricted by rigid ceremonial doctrines, human commanders trained constantly to improvise whenever plans failed. Sarah quietly admitted those differences might become humanity's greatest advantage against an enemy that learned predictable behavior with frightening speed. The final vote began shortly afterward. One by one, representatives activated their authorization panels, while the glowing display above the table counted each decision. Nora could not ignore the painful memory of another vote held years earlier inside the Galactic Council chamber. That earlier count had ended 41-2 against humanity. Today's numbers slowly climbed in the opposite direction. 19 representatives supported immediate intervention, while only 2 opposed the proposal. The result carried powerful symbolism that everyone in the room immediately recognized. Humanity had chosen action instead of revenge. Admiral Lane accepted the outcome with military discipline despite his disagreement, promising to command the home defense network while the expeditionary fleet carried humanity's decision into dangerous territory. Preparations for the largest deployment in human history began before the meeting officially ended. 3 weeks later, enormous shipyards across human space worked without pause as engineers completed final inspections on 50 newly constructed warships. At the center of the formation stood the Hearthfire, the most advanced capital vessel humanity had ever built. Unlike previous generations influenced by Council design standards, the Hearthfire represented 3 uninterrupted years of independent engineering and frontier experience. Every compartment emphasized practicality over ceremony. Every weapon system prioritized flexibility instead of tradition. Crews trained together using constantly changing combat scenarios designed specifically to confuse adaptive enemies. Nora boarded the flagship alongside Daniel, Lucy, and Counselor Sarah, who insisted upon serving as liaison despite everything she had endured. Watching thousands of men and women preparing confidently for departure, Nora realized humanity no longer needed anyone's approval to protect what mattered. The expedition crossed the former Council frontier beneath complete radio silence, before long-range sensors finally detected an enormous battle already unfolding ahead. Lucy enlarged the tactical display, as dozens of Council warships struggled desperately against countless dark vessels advancing through organized formations, unlike anything humanity had previously encountered. System defenses collapsed one after another, while civilian evacuation routes disappeared beneath relentless attack. Sarah quietly identified the location as Hion's Reach, one of the Council's final defensive barriers protecting the populated core worlds. Daniel calculated they possessed barely 11 minutes before the remaining defenders would be completely overwhelmed. Nora looked across the bridge at the disciplined crews awaiting her command, then toward the distant battle consuming another civilization. Without hesitation, she ordered full engines ahead, declaring that no more worlds would fall silent. The Hearthfire accelerated toward Hion's Reach with every engine burning at maximum power, while 50 human warships tightened formation behind it. Through the bridge viewport, Nora Bennett watched flashes of distant explosions illuminate the darkness, where the remaining Council fleet fought a hopeless battle. Lucy Hart rapidly updated tactical projections as fresh sensor data poured into the command display. The Quiet Ones had already destroyed more than half of the defending ships, and the survivors were retreating toward the planet in scattered groups. Daniel Ford calculated that another 10 minutes would be enough for the enemy to surround every remaining escape route. Nora understood there was no longer time for complicated planning. Humanity had crossed the frontier to stop the silence, and this battle would become the first true test of everything they had built since walking away from the Galactic Council. The human fleet entered combat without using the rigid formations favored by the Council for generations. Instead of advancing as one predictable wall of warships, every captain followed a constantly changing tactical network that encouraged independent decisions based upon rapidly shifting conditions. Smaller destroyers darted between larger cruisers, drawing enemy vessels into carefully prepared crossfire, while heavy carriers launched waves of autonomous strike craft from unexpected angles. The Quiet Ones immediately responded by altering their own attack pattern, but for the first time, their adaptation slowed. They had studied conventional fleets for years, yet humanity's decentralized battlefield philosophy presented countless variables they had never encountered before. Daniel smiled briefly as enemy formations hesitated, confirming the new tactics were forcing even this relentless opponent to think, instead of simply advancing. Inside the chaos, Nora ordered rescue operations to begin before victory had even been secured. Human frigates raced toward damaged Council vessels still broadcasting emergency beacons, while combat ships provided protective cover against incoming attacks. Many alien commanders hesitated in disbelief as human Marines entered burning corridors, carrying wounded strangers toward evacuation shuttles without asking which government they represented. Several rescued officers recognized humanity's insignia and struggled to understand why the same civilization they had rejected years earlier had returned to save them. Nora ignored every political implication. Those trapped crews were not responsible for decisions made inside distant council chambers. Humanity had chosen its path freely, and every life saved reminded the galaxy that strength meant far more than simply winning battles. The fighting grew even more dangerous as the Quiet Ones deployed larger warships unlike anything previously recorded inside Sarah's recovered intelligence files. These massive black vessels moved with terrifying precision, coordinating entire swarms without transmitting detectable communication signals. Every destroyed drone immediately triggered subtle adjustments across the remaining fleet, as though every ship shared one silent mind. Lucy worked relentlessly to identify patterns hidden beneath their movements, while Daniel modified human formations every few minutes to prevent the enemy from predicting future actions. Explosions shook the hearthfire repeatedly as incoming fire struck defensive shields. Damage reports flooded the bridge, yet every surviving human vessel continued adapting faster than the enemy expected. The battle became less about overwhelming firepower and more about which civilization could continue learning under impossible pressure. Midway through the engagement, Lucy suddenly discovered a crucial weakness buried within thousands of sensor readings collected throughout the battle. Although the Quiet Ones adapted rapidly to repeated tactics, their coordination slowed noticeably whenever several command vessels were forced to process too many unpredictable threats simultaneously. Nora immediately ordered every squadron commander to abandon synchronized attacks and begin creating controlled battlefield confusion instead. Human captains spread across multiple vectors, striking different targets without repeating recognizable patterns, while electronic warfare teams flooded enemy sensors with constantly shifting false signatures. The result appeared almost chaotic to outside observers, yet beneath the apparent disorder, every movement followed one guiding principle: never allow the enemy enough certainty to complete its adaptation. Within minutes, the advancing darkness finally began losing momentum for the first time since the invasion started. Council survivors quickly recognized what humanity was accomplishing and gradually adjusted their own tactics to support the rapidly changing battle plan. Alien cruisers abandoned ceremonial formations that had defined their military doctrine for centuries and instead followed human targeting instructions transmitted directly from the hearthfire. Sarah watched silently as officers from civilizations that once dismissed humanity now accepted guidance without hesitation because survival mattered more than pride. The combined fleet slowly pushed the Quiet Ones away from Heian's reach system, reclaiming orbital space that had seemed permanently lost only hours earlier. The cost remained heartbreaking. 2 human destroyers disappeared beneath concentrated enemy fire, while several Council cruisers sacrificed themselves protecting evacuation transports. Victory carried painful sacrifices, yet for the first time the Silence itself had been forced to retreat. When the final enemy vessels withdrew into deep space, exhausted crews across the battlefield struggled to believe the impossible had actually happened. Humanity and the surviving Council fleets had defended a populated system against an opponent previously considered unstoppable. Rescue ships immediately began collecting escape pods drifting among countless shattered hulls, while medical teams treated wounded soldiers regardless of species. One elderly Council captain approached Nora aboard the Hearthfire after being rescued from his destroyed flagship. Unable to find appropriate words through his translator, he simply bowed his head in silent respect before thanking humanity for refusing to abandon the galaxy even after the galaxy had abandoned them first. Nora accepted the gratitude quietly, understanding that true respect carried far greater meaning when freely offered instead of reluctantly granted through political compromise. As engineers analyzed wreckage recovered from the defeated enemy vessels, another unsettling discovery emerged from the damaged command cores. Daniel and Lucy assembled every senior officer inside the Hearthfire's intelligence center, where holographic projections reconstructed fragments of the captured data. What they found erased any celebration spreading through the fleet. The force attacking Heian's Reach represented only a reconnaissance division sent to evaluate organized resistance before a vastly larger migration arrived from unexplored regions beyond known space. Sensor logs suggested hundreds, perhaps thousands, of additional fleets were already moving toward the galaxy, following identical silent trajectories. The victory everyone desperately needed had only delayed something unimaginably greater. Nora stared at the projections in complete silence before looking toward the distant stars ahead, realizing humanity had not just won the first battle of a war. It had awakened an enemy powerful enough to threaten. The celebration aboard the Hearthfire lasted only a few hours before reality returned with crushing weight. Daniel Ford finished decoding the captured enemy data while every senior officer gathered inside the command center. The holographic display filled with hundreds of faint red markers stretching far beyond the explored galaxy. What humanity had defeated at Heian's Reach had never been the main invasion. It had only been a scouting force sent to evaluate resistance before the arrival of something vastly larger. Silence settled across the room as the numbers continued growing. Every projection showed the same terrifying conclusion. If the approaching fleets reached inhabited space without unified opposition, no civilization would survive long enough to rebuild. Humanity had won the first battle, but the real war had not even begun. News of the victory spread rapidly across surviving Council worlds, yet so did the horrifying intelligence recovered from the enemy wreckage. Systems that had once argued endlessly over borders, trade rights, and political influence suddenly faced a common reality that ignored every historical disagreement. Emergency broadcasts called representatives from every surviving civilization back to the Galactic Council for the first full assembly since the beginning of the invasion. Counselor Sarah personally invited Nora Bennett to attend, explaining that no meaningful decision could be made without humanity's presence. 3 years earlier, Nora had walked away from that chamber believing she would never return. Now she traveled back not as someone seeking acceptance, but as the leader of a civilization whose actions had already changed the fate of the galaxy. When Nora entered the enormous council chamber once again, the room felt completely different from the place she remembered. Entire sections remained empty because many civilizations no longer existed to occupy their seats. The voices that once filled every corridor with political debate had been replaced by quiet determination and visible grief. Delegates who had previously ignored humanity now stood respectfully as Nora crossed the chamber. Counselor Sarah occupied the central platform where Counselor Threx had once confidently defended the vote against humanity. His homeworld had fallen during the earliest months of the invasion, a painful reminder that arrogance offered no protection against the quiet ones. Looking around the transformed chamber, Nora realized the galaxy had already paid an unimaginable price for lessons learned far too late. Sarah addressed the surviving delegates before turning toward Nora with complete honesty. She acknowledged every mistake the Council had made during humanity's years of membership. Pride had blinded governments that believed cooperation could always wait until tomorrow. Fear had convinced them to limit humanity instead of embracing its growing strength. Political convenience had outweighed simple fairness until one disastrous vote destroyed decades of trust. Sarah admitted those decisions could never be undone, but she asked whether humanity would consider rejoining the Galactic Council as a full and equal member. Every delegate watched Nora silently, understanding that her answer might determine whether the remaining civilizations face the coming storm together or separately. The chamber waited without a single whisper breaking the heavy silence surrounding the question. Nora remained quiet for several long moments before finally stepping toward the center of the chamber. She explained that humanity had never wanted revenge after leaving the council. They had wanted dignity, equality, and the freedom to determine their own future without begging for recognition. Those goals had already been achieved during the years spent building independently. Returning under the same political structure, even with equal voting rights, would ignore everything humanity had learned through sacrifice. The Council had once expected humans to earn respect by serving others endlessly. Instead, respect had only arrived after humanity stopped asking for permission to matter. Nora gently declined the invitation, not from bitterness, but because the future required something entirely different from rebuilding the past. The unexpected refusal created another wave of uneasy silence throughout the chamber, until Nora continued speaking. Humanity had not crossed the frontier to rescue Council worlds because treaties demanded it. Human fleets had come because innocent lives deserved protection regardless of politics. That same principle should guide whatever replaced the old Galactic Council. Instead of one government controlling many civilizations, Nora proposed an alliance of equals where every member retained complete independence while cooperating against shared threats. No civilization would possess permanent authority over another. No frontier would be defended by obligation alone. Every contribution would be respected because every member entered freely, rather than through political pressure. The proposal transformed the atmosphere inside the chamber as delegates slowly realized they were witnessing the birth of an entirely new era. Debate followed for many hours, yet, unlike the endless arguments Nora remembered from previous years, this discussion carried a different spirit. Delegates openly admitted past failures instead of hiding behind careful diplomatic language. Military commanders shared resources without demanding political concessions. Scientists exchanged research collected during the invasion, regardless of national origin. Even governments that had once competed fiercely for influence now understood survival depended upon trust built through action rather than speeches. One after another, representatives accepted humanity's proposal until every surviving civilization voted in favor of establishing the alliance of equals. The unanimous decision stood in complete contrast to the infamous 41-2 vote that had once driven humanity away. History had not erased its mistakes, but it had finally chosen to learn from them. Months later, the first combined alliance fleet departed from Heon's reach, carrying ships designed by dozens of civilizations working together for the first time without hidden competition. Human engineers incorporated adaptive battlefield tactics, while former Council scientists contributed advanced shield technology and faster communication systems. Refugees returned to liberated worlds, where reconstruction replaced despair. Joint academies trained young officers from every member civilization side by side, teaching them that cooperation succeeded only when built upon mutual respect, instead of political superiority. Nora often visited those training centers, and quietly smiled whenever she watched future leaders solving problems together, without caring which species first suggested the answer. The greatest victory over the quiet ones had not been military. It had been proving that free civilizations could unite without surrendering their identities. Years later, historians would describe humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council as the moment everything changed. Many believed the galaxy fell silent because humanity walked away, but Nora always understood the truth was more complicated. The silence arrived because too many civilizations confused power with wisdom and authority with respect, until disaster exposed the difference. Humanity's greatest strength had never been superior technology or larger fleets. It had always been the willingness to stand again after rejection, to protect others without demanding recognition, and to build something better whenever old systems failed. Standing beneath a sky finally filled with peaceful stars once more, Nora looked across a future shaped by sacrifice instead of resentment, and realized the galaxy had finally discovered what made humanity truly extraordinary. They never walked away to abandon everyone else. They